Hey there, glad that you came back for this last video. In the first video we talked about some tips for reading, how to get the most out of what you're reading, and in the last video we talked about a philosophy, or maybe we should call it some principles for buying books, for determining which books you should be buying. Well, in this video we're going to be walking through the process of evaluating a book to determine whether or not you want to buy that book. So for instance, if you see a book in the bookstore and you know nothing about it, how do you know whether you want to spend your money and waste your time reading that book? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, one of the ways I determine which books I'm going to buy next are by reading other books and listening to sermons. If a particular book gets mentioned by several of my favorite preachers, then I figure that's a pretty good book and maybe I need to get it. Or if I see a book being referenced in the footnotes of a bunch of different other books, then I think to myself, if that many people are quoting that book, then obviously that book has a lot of good information. Maybe I need to get that book. Honestly, I rarely buy a book that I'm not at least somewhat familiar with already. But there are times when I have bought books that I knew nothing about. And on this video, I'm going to walk you through that process that I use to evaluate whether or not I want to buy a particular book. The book that I'm going to be using in this example is this book here that is called Canon Revisited. It's by a guy named Michael J. Kruger. I was at a conference one year when I saw this book and saw it on the table and thought it looked interesting, but I'd never heard of it and I had never heard of the author. But I decided to buy it anyway. And the reason that I decided to buy it is because it was a book on a subject that I wanted to know about. This book is talking about the canon. Now, when we use the word canon in this sense, we're not talking about a metal tube that shoots projectiles. The word canon in theological circles means the books that we have in our Bible. So when we ask the question, which books actually belong in the Bible, that's a question of the canon. So when I saw this book, I was immediately interested because I wanted to learn more about the canon. I knew that I needed to learn more about the canon. I particularly wanted to know more about what the Bible itself has to say about the canon of Scripture. So when I picked up this book and I looked on the back and I saw in the description, it talks about how this book uses the biblical text itself to help us understand the canon. So I thought, aha, that's exactly what I'm looking for. That's something that I didn't know a lot about, something that I knew I needed to learn about, and here was a book that seemed to talk about that particular subject. Well, also on the back I saw who it was endorsed by and the publisher. Now, in this particular case, it was endorsed by one person that I like and one person that I don't really care for that much. So in this case, the endorsements kind of could have gone either way. The publisher, again, is not a big deal. The endorsements and the publisher can give you a clue as to the quality of the book, as to the doctrine of the book, but those two things really aren't foolproof. In fact, this book that I've read recently on the law of God is actually endorsed by two people that I've never heard of. It's by a publishing company that I've never heard of. I can't even pronounce their name. And yet this turned out to be one of the best books on the law of God that I have in my library. So again, endorsements and the publisher can kind of give you a clue as to the quality of the book, but they're certainly not everything. Well, after looking at the back of the book, I opened the book up and I looked at the table of contents. And as I was looking at the table of contents, I could see that a lot of the subjects were things that I wanted to learn about. But I also saw that there were some topics that were being covered that I didn't know anything about. And that's a good thing. Because again, when I buy a book and when I read a book, I want to learn something new every time I read a book. I want it to increase my knowledge. I don't want to waste my time reading a book about stuff that I already know about. So in this case, I saw that there were some things in this book that I didn't know, but that I needed to know. Now, as I was going through the table of contents, I also saw that this author had a good theological perspective. Again, I don't have a problem reading people from different perspectives, reading authors from different perspectives, But if I'm going to spend money on a book, I want to make sure that it's not coming from some strange doctrine way out there in left field. And so because I wanted this to be a good book that would teach me something solid, I wanted to make sure that they had a good theological foundation. And just reading the table of contents, I could tell that they were coming at this issue of canon from a good theological perspective. Anyway, after looking through the table of contents, I kind of skimmed through the book and I just looked at some of the footnotes. For one thing, I wanted a at least somewhat scholarly book, and so I wanted a book with footnotes because, again, I wanted this to actually teach me something good. I wanted it to be a good scholarly book. But I also looked at the footnotes to try to find out where he was getting his ideas from. If he was citing mediocre sources, then I could tell maybe this wouldn't be a solid book. But as I'm looking through these footnotes, and I recognize some of the authors, and they're good theologians, so I thought, aha, he's getting his information from some good places. I also looked in the back of the book at the bibliography for the same reason. The bibliography just tells you some other books that you can read to learn some of the ideas that the author is using in the book. And as I was going through the bibliography, I saw good theologians from our day. I saw good theologians from centuries gone by. So I thought, again, this author is getting his information from some very good places. So after looking at all those different parts of the book, I concluded that this was actually going to be a very solid book on the New Testament canon. I knew that it was going to be a book that would teach me something that I didn't already know, so I wouldn't be wasting my time. And I also knew that it was going to be from a solid theological perspective, which again, for this particular subject, was something that I needed. So, was the book any good? Yes, actually, this turned out to be a very good purchase. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but really, I took a bit of a gamble buying a book from an author that I'd never heard of, but this turned out to be a very excellent book. It really, truly is one of the best books that I own on the New Testament canon. So I hope these last few videos were helpful. Again, reading is just such an important thing, and unfortunately, not a lot of Christians do it as much as they should. So I would encourage you to buy books, buy good books, and then once you buy them, read them. Don't just let them sit on the shelf. All right, well, thanks again for putting up with these 3 videos. And again, I hope you learned something. And until next time, we'll see you later. All right, so as you may have noticed from the counter along the bottom of the video, this video is not done. If I added this segment onto my last video on the process of buying books, that means that I have been accepted as an Amazon affiliate. And what that means is that I'm going to be able to promote certain books or other things through these YouTube videos. And say if I do a book review, I can have a link that will take you to Amazon's website where you can buy that book. And if you buy that book, or if you make another purchase on the Amazon website from that click, that means I get a small commission. And that small commission is going to support not only this YouTube channel, but also my ministry, Fifth Kingdom Ministries. So if there are links to Amazon's website in the description section of this video, that means, as I said, I'm an Amazon affiliate. So I want to take a quick look at these books that I talked about in this video. And the one that I talked about the most was this book here. It's called Canon Revisited by Michael J. Kruger. As I said, it's a very excellent book on the canon. It talks about what does the Bible say about which books belong in the New Testament. So it comes from a biblical perspective. It's very solid in that respect. It talks about church history too, but mainly it gets its view of the canon from Scripture. As I said, very excellent book, but I do have one caution for you. It's not written for the average Christian. It can be a tough read. So if you are a new Christian, or even if you're a Christian and have been for a while, but you're not really familiar with the doctrine of canon, if you're not familiar with a lot of big fancy theological words, this book may not be for you. But if you are a pastor, or if you are a layperson like myself who just likes to read theological books, it is a very excellent book on the canon. Now, the other book that I mentioned was this book here. It's called Walking in the Law of the Lord, and it's written by William O. Einwechter. Not a very well-known author, but a very solid author. And it's a short book, so it's not very thick, but it is deep. This too is written from a theological perspective that is very accurate, but it's also not for everyone. It's again, uses a lot of big theological terms, a lot of sometimes hard to grasp theological concepts. So not meant for the average person. Now in the future, I do hope to review some books that are a little easier to read and a little more helpful to the average person. But these two books are not. That being said, this is one of the best books that I've ever read on the law of God. So again, if you're a pastor or a lay person who just likes to read theological books, then you should think about getting it. It really is one of the best books on the law that you can get. So that being said, I'll shut up now and we'll see you next time.